Good morning and welcome to our second part of our SIMULIA for Life Sciences webinar series, where today we're going to focus on the living heart. There we go. Now we're starting to beat a bit. That makes me feel better. I'm going to introduce SIMULIA. My name is Glenn Compton. I'm with Hawkridge Systems, and I manage our Value Solutions product lines from Dassault Systems. We also have with us today Dr. Stephen Levine from Dassault Systems, and he's going to introduce the Living Heart Project. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our partnership with Thornton Tomasetti. Unfortunately, Mahesh Kalasam could not make it today. So the three of us together are here to help you as our customers in these life science applications. Certainly Hawkridge Systems has been there for years for SolidWorks support, sales and support. We've been a SIMULIA software provider for the last 5 years, and we can support you with that as well. But we acknowledge that we don't necessarily have the expertise that the industry has for life sciences. So we've formed a partnership with Thornton Tomasetti so that when we engage with our customers in the life sciences with these really tough problems, we can help them get started with a solution that's going to help them overcome the challenges that they're up against. And then finally, Dassault Systems, which is, of course, our software partner on both sides of the fence with SolidWorks and SIMULIA, and moving forward with CATIA and Innovia and the 3D Experience platform. So SIMULIA, of course, is the Dassault Systems brand that's dedicated to making realistic simulation an integral business practice to explore, discover, understand, and improve product life and nature. Usually when I give this presentation, I mention the living heart. Today I have the good fortune of we're actually going to introduce you to the living heart, because there's no other way of, this is the pinnacle of being able to use what I consider finite element analysis to show life and nature simulated on a screen. So it's for me, I'm pretty fascinated by it. But Dassault Systems has been doing this for a long time. So they started with SolidWorks simulation, I believe back in 1998, and certainly Hawkridge Systems has helped a number of you with that software. And then back in 2006, they acquired Abaqus and formed the SIMULIA brand that we're going to talk about today. Since then, there have been several other acquisitions, including iSight, Tosca, FE-Safe, SimPack, and all of these tools come together to make a more robust solution for our customers. But of course, the foundation of that is obviously Abaqus. It's the world's technology leading suite of finite element analysis software for realistic simulation. It's the most powerful complete solutions for both routine and sophisticated engineering problems across the full spectrum of industrial applications. Today we're going to focus on the life science applications, and I wanted to introduce Dr. Stephen Levine, who's the founder and executive director of the Living Heart Project, and he's also the senior director of life sciences for SIMULIA, the simulation brand that we've been talking about. Since the brand inception in 2006, Steve has been responsible for leading SIMULIA's strategy and long-term vision of enabling science and engineering software to deliver on its full potential. His current focus is the development of virtual human modeling and the 3D Experience Twin to transform medical device development and healthcare practice by combining physics-based simulation with artificial intelligence and augmented reality to create a 3D human. Steve is also responsible for incubating a healthcare startup community within the 3D Experience Labs at Dassault and creating a marketplace of digital healthcare services. Steve holds a doctorate in materials engineering from Rutgers University and was elected as a fellow in the American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering. Steve has nearly 30 years of experience driving innovation and technology, beginning his career in health tech at the San Diego-based startup BioSim, which went public as Accelerus in 2004 and acquired by Dassault Systems in 2014, forming the BioVia brand. With that, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Steve Levine.
Great. Thanks, Glenn. I appreciate that introduction, long-winded as it was a little bit. But I really appreciate this opportunity to share my story here and the work that I'm doing. And I know that I'm as fascinated on a daily basis as what's possible with our technology as everyone around me. And this is really a great time of discovery for engineering, because I think with the Living Heart, we've really shown that there's an entirely new horizon that engineering can really provide a value on. And that's really the topic of what I've been focusing on, and that is really virtual human modeling. And that we've used the living heart as our centerpiece to really show how we can make design and engineering people-centric and not rely on making it machine-centric. And so I'd like to take you through that history a little bit. So as you mentioned, really the inspiration for turning my attention to simulating life came from this declaration of our purpose to move beyond just products, but actually innovations that harmonize product life and nature. And with that challenge that our CEO, Bernard Charlet, shown here, who gave to us, at the time I was leading the strategy for SIMULIA, as you mentioned, and the question became, for us to actually simulate life, I thought, well, what if we could provide doctors the same technology that we apply to other industries? So we know that people can test cars and trains and planes and everything else that we build on the computer, but doctors are still left with one-dimensional scans and things like that, maybe 2D images, and they don't have any access to all of the technology we provide to everyone else. And so with that question, I thought, could we do this? Could we really build a physically realistic simulation of the human heart? And that was really the inspiration behind forming the Living Heart Project. And we knew that at the time, this is a complicated topic. There are reasons why it had never been done before. We knew that the knowledge for how the human heart works really was distributed amongst hundreds of people, thousands of people around the world, falling into largely these different categories. So the researchers who really understand the deep mechanics of how the heart works, the tissue mechanics, the electrophysiology, et cetera. Clinicians who have gained most of the information through observation and study, and understand the behavioral part, the industry who make the devices and the tools to analyze and the scans. And each of those communities all, of course, have to come together with the regulator so the products can come to the market. So we set the project up specifically to bring together those four communities, and we set about the task of building a living heart. And this is a very simplified version of the process we went through. We had to start from image data, so from CT and MRI scans, we got very accurate geometry from an actual human subject. We built a very complicated computational model with all the appropriate, obviously we had to build the mesh, the tissue properties, et cetera. The heart is actually made up of a very complicated fibrous structure, and we were able to use the composite infrastructure that we had actually built from the aerospace industry to handle composites. Was actually a perfect formulation for replicating the human fiber structure. We were able to get that from MRI data, or differential tensor MRI. We had to couple the physics, the electrophysiology with the mechanics, blood pressure model, system model, et cetera. And when it all came together, we had a functioning living heart model. And so for the first time, we really had a fully electromechanical simulation of the human heart, one suitable for studying sort of the normal engineering problems that we would do, but also be able to look at the electrical signal. So we propagate the electrical signal the exact same way nature does. We start at the sinus node and propagate through the tissue and through the Purkinje network. That stimulates the mechanical response, which then provides the blood flow. And so we had a complete replication of the human heart, at least in terms of its mechanics. We did our best and continue to do our best to fine tune it, to replicate the actual behavior of the human heart. So these are some of the data that we've used to validate that the model produces the physics of the heart pretty well. In addition, we looked at the physical properties, the functional properties, the observed properties. So we have clinicians who stare at hearts for a living and understand the behavior to be able to look at exactly whether we can replicate the beating mechanics. And that's part of the goal of that community. So validation is, of course, very important. We've also, in addition to the engineering part, because Dassault Systems has aspects of our business where they produce photorealistic capabilities, so we're able to actually render our heart in a way that a doctor would be much more familiar with it, or maybe a patient. And that on the left is a virtual heart. On the right is actually a 3D print of that same heart through our partners Biomotics and Stratasys. So we're really connecting the virtual world and the real world in a very physical way. And that model on the right, by the way, the properties of the tissue are predicted by the Abaqus output. So it not only looks like a real heart, but it feels and reacts like a real heart. So if you put devices in it, the tissue would respond based on the Abaqus prediction. So this was the timeline. I won't spend a lot of time on it. We went through several generations, going from the basic principles, the proof of concept, all the way through commercial product. Now we're working on applications and validation, and its availability on the 3D Experience platform. So it's quite amazing now that with this team that's come together to be able to actually produce a biofidelical, realistic human heart. I don't know if the animations come through very well, but we now can look at the tissue mechanics and actually use this as a virtual patient for doing testing. The real credit for much of this work comes to the community that we've been able to pull together. I mentioned we set out in the project to bring together 4 different communities. So the research community, the industry, clinical cardiologists, as well as the regulatory. These is a partial list. It's not quite up to date, but you can get a good example of the kinds of people who have been contributing their understanding and evaluation of the heart model. So with each version, this community comes together and evaluates our progress and fine-tunes and brings their individual piece of expertise to ensure that the model is capable of replicating their knowledge or their application. And a key part of this was really the FDA joining the project in 2014 and actually made a formal 5-year commitment to a research collaboration agreement to help bring this product to market. They signed with the belief that simulation could help them to do their jobs better, and so they signed to a 5-year contract to do so. So along the way, because we knew we had to speak not just to engineers, but to doctors and ultimately patients like you and me, we built 3D virtual reality capabilities to be able to actually communicate the amount of information available. And one tool that we've found very effective is actually this 3D holographic platform. It's a tablet where you actually interact with it, maybe like a virtual echocardiogram, and this will pan over and allow you to see what he's seeing, which is actually a floating 3D heart beating right in front of him that he can start to interact with. He can put a plane through it, which is really the sort of virtual echocardiogram, to be able to look inside. You can, because it's virtual reality, you can take that heart and pull it apart. You can actually look and see what's inside of it. And so a doctor can now start to perform a virtual surgery and actually investigate inside the patient in the virtual world in ways that they could only imagine. But more importantly, from an engineering perspective, we now have a tool. We we now have a tool that we can evaluate the performance of the heart disease, pacemakers, stents, valves, etc. And I'll just walk through a few examples of how the heart's been used for that purpose. So one of the first examples that we did, and this was actually by request of the FDA when we first started, was to help them to come up with a standard for pacemaker lead fatigue inside the heart. As you may know, pacemakers provide an electrical charge through essentially electrical wire, and those electrical wires have to undergo a lot of motion. And because they're metal wires, motion can lead to fatigue and they can break. And they really had no good understanding of what the fatigue environment was inside the heart. So we worked with a standards group, the AMI group, to put together an actual standard procedure for inserting pacemaker leads into the heart and then beating the heart and then testing the fatigue and varying all of the parameters that are options in the real world: location of the lead, the amount of slack, the tension, etc. And all of those variables made it impossible for them to do a clinical study because that would require far too many patients. So by doing a virtual study on virtual patients, we could identify what are the most dependent and important characteristics, and then they were able to use that to define a very targeted clinical trial, which made it practical, reducing the cost by an order of magnitude. And with that, that was very convincing demonstration of how simulation can save significant amount of cost with virtual clinical trials. One of the areas that are that's undergoing a lot of interest right now are artificial heart valves. We've had a lot of our partners been evaluating the heart for use of that. Go through a couple of examples. So one of the first was looking at a new device. In fact, this device was brought to us by a clinician who had at the Cleveland Clinic, who was interested in helping solve a very important particular kind of heart attack, and that's when you have a myocardial infarction right in the area of the papillary muscle. The papillary muscle is responsible for holding closed the mitral valve, and if the tissue in that area is compromised, it can't close, the valve leaks, it becomes progressive, and the patient doesn't die from the heart attack, he actually dies from the subsequent remodeling that the heart undergoes as a result of the valve leak. And so the question is, could you actually build this little retensioning arm, and would it work to retension the chordae? And so he brought us that study, and so we took our valve, in this case we took the mitral valve, and in the healthy case, the valve closed, we introduced the disease, and we could see that after giving our heart a heart attack, we actually reproduced the leak, and then surgically inserted the annulus ring inside of it, and dramatic improvement in the closure as a result of that ring in place. So we can immediately tell, without ever having to perform a physical operation, that this device could actually work. We could even quantify it by doing fluid dynamics afterwards, so we can see that going from a disease state where the amount of regurgitation was profound, this would actually be enough to more or less lead to death. But then with the treated, you could actually reduce it back dramatically, although not as far as you need to go. And in fact, we're now working with Thompson and that group to be able to optimize that ring. This is an example of actually taking that generic application that we've done and actually introducing a patient-specific aortic arch. So this is a case of looking at a TAVI valve, transatrial valve, where the surgeon's actually inserting the valve without opening the heart. And so they're relying very much on the degree of fit between the valve and the annulus. And so this is an example of actually performing the surgery, taking the living heart as the container, introducing a diseased heart from a patient, and then comparing a commercial valve, in this case a Medtronic core valve, with a valve that Stony Brook, who did this work, is actually building a synthetic valve alternative. And so they're seeing if they could actually do a 3D print one day of a personalized heart valve and how that might improve performance versus what exists the best in case on the market right now. And so you could see how you could optimize your products much better having a virtual heart than trying to do it on an animal and then ultimately on a physical human. So with such an environment, we now have the ability to realistically describe the boundary conditions under which a medical device is actually going to perform. That can actually be used, and this is a very efficient workflow that was provided to us by one of our members at Medes, who actually perform the virtual surgery, extract the boundary conditions, then take a submodel out to do this shape optimization very efficiently, then computationally perform optimization with a product like EyeSight. They can retest it in the full heart to make sure, fine tune it, and then take that heart and put it into an array of different types of patients to be able to understand exactly what would happen when this product actually goes into the clinical trial. And so you have an optimized product, been tested in virtual humans before you ever get to market. Another example is a coronary stent. These are, of course, very well successful in the marketplace. There are 500,000 procedures, just the US alone, but these products need to be incredibly durable. They have to last for a decade or more, but they still suffer for some problems. About a third of them have to be replaced or replicated somehow due to stenosis. And there's also new materials, dissolving stents, et cetera, that are coming to the market. So there's still a lot of innovation to be had. So we want to provide a better environment to be able to design these very high precision stents, and also to get into more delicate places like the microvasculature. And so this is a workflow that would allow you to actually test your stent inside a beating heart, because we know that particularly in regions of the heart where there's a lot of curvature, a standard bench test is not very precise. So you can go through, we can simulate the entire process. And this is one example that we've done where you can actually then run the heart and actually determine the fatigue analysis, not on an average, but actually based on the location where you might actually insert the heart, the stent into the heart. And you can see from this example that depending on where you make your measurement, you could draw a different conclusion about whether or not this stent would survive. And of course, this was an extreme case that we used, but here we see that in fact it would not survive. Another kind of application, and this is a left ventricular assist device. So this is a case where we've taken our heart as a system and now hooked up, and this was done, by the way, through the University of California at San Francisco and a Veterans Affairs Fund. And the researchers here were looking at the effect of left heart failure. And you can see here on the right, we can not only beat the heart, but we can look inside to see what's happening to the muscle tissue. And we know that residual stress will ultimately lead to remodeling, and then heart tissue will grow, and heart failure will be progressive, and the patient will die. So the question is, can you use a pump to remove excess blood from the left ventricle, pump it directly into the aorta and reduce that stress and keep the patient alive. And so the simulation was done to actually simulate the use of the LVAD at 2 different speeds. And there's a lot of data here, so it's a little bit complicated, but let me build it. So they were able to go in, take a healthy heart, introduce heart failure. So you can see the ejection fraction drop from 56 to 28%, and then increase the effectiveness of the LVAD from 2 liters to 4.5 liters per minute, actually bringing the ejection fraction back up to almost normal. But in addition to looking at that, you can now look inside and see what's happening to the heart itself. And so they were able to look, and I'll freeze these frames, at end diastole. And you can see now, if you look at the heart failure at end diastole, you can see there's residual stress in that. And that stress would lead to remodeling, and that remodeling would lead to death. It's partially reduced at 2 liters per minute. It's completely reduced at 4.5 liters per minute. So you have actually a successful treatment based on that. However, if you look at end systole, you don't see quite the same results. What was actually seen, and you can see the numbers here up in the chart on the right, that in fact, by pumping the blood out of the left ventricle, you can actually reduce the stress on the left ventricle, but the right ventricle remains at 340% of the original heart stress. And so this reminds us that the heart is a system, and by putting in a left ventricular assist device, you're actually not helping the right ventricle. And it turns out that 10 to 30% of patients actually with left ventricle assist devices die of right ventricle failure. And so here's again a case where you've got now a tool where you could potentially fine tune the way that this device runs, or potentially have a coupled device that solves both of these problems. So speaking of blood flow, so this is an example of, this came to us from a Dr. Partho Sengupta, who observed experimentally that if you look in the aorta and look at blood flow, you can see very distinctive patterns before and after a TAVR insertion. We can see that these eddies that are actually put in by the human body to clean the tissue valves are eliminated by the TAVR, and these actually reduce the lifetime of the TAVR valves, which they're beginning to see. And so the question is, can we see this in our simulation? And in fact, we do actually see this. We went back to blood flow simulations. We can actually see, we replicate that kind of behavior very, very precisely. This is just a short video of just showing you the kind of blood flow information we can start to get inside the heart now that we have accurate representation of it. And so you can imagine how you can optimize with that information. We also noticed that with certain valves, this is now looking at blood flow. This is a fully coupled FSI simulation inside the heart. It was done with our partners, Capvidia. We see very distinctive flow patterns inside the heart. And I was wondering, like the other, is that real? And so I went to the literature and I actually found this example where they've actually identified with this kind of valve very similar patterns inside the heart. So we're feeling very confident that by getting the electrical signal right, getting mechanical coupling right, we're getting exactly the right flow patterns. And so if you have that kind of information virtually, you can apply that to real problems. And here's a case where a surgeon was looking at a congenital defect in rebuilding the heart. And by simulating the blood flow patterns before and after the simulation, we can provide guidance on exactly how to reconstruct that heart. And in fact, this surgeon, Dr. Christian Slenzak, went on German TV just last year and showcased this example of simulation as it can help him to actually reconstruct infant hearts. The last example, and I'll move through quickly, is actually taking and using the heart as a phantom for imaging studies. So this is a case from Duke University where they took the living heart and surgically inserted it into their CT simulator. So they have a human model, a static model for the human body. They put our heart inside of it, and they put that model inside their virtual CT. So now we have the ability to create CT scans based on an actual beating heart, which allows you to not only identify the connection between a virtual model and what it would look like, but it allows you to validate your techniques for analyzing experimental data because you know what the original source of truth is. And so they're now putting in stents into those and coronary plaque, and to be able to validate the techniques that the device users actually use, the radiologists, for analyzing these. And hopefully that'll result in much higher precision. So the net on this journey that we're now in our 4th year of is that this one model has been able to replicate capabilities across this entire range of application space. And I haven't touched on all of these in the interest of time. But with the benefit of this broad community, we've actually been able to demonstrate that the simulation technology really can replicate the needs of the medical community and the device companies. So more importantly, we have continuity, what we like to call digital continuity through our platform, all the way from discovery to down through product launch, regulatory decision, and post-market monitoring, and a complete loop, and digital continuity. So what we've been able to do in other domains like automotive, we can now do for healthcare. So all this information we actually post through the project on a website, 3ds.com/heart, so you can get background on everything that I've talked about, videos and data sheets and all the articles that have been written. So I appreciate your patience and your time. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Glenn.
All right. Thank you, Steve. It really was fascinating stuff. Okay, a couple weeks ago when we did this, we had on the phone with us Mahesh Kalazam, who's the Vice President of Thornton Tomasetti. He had, of course, come from SIMULIA as well, and as one of the directors in life sciences. Thornton Tomasetti has a deep knowledge of modeling and simulation applied to multiple industries with a variety of tools and methods, but specifically with SIMULIA software, such as Abaqus, EyeSight, and Tosca. They also have a dedicated team working on life science applications with expertise in virtual human modeling, including with the living heart model and with other body organs. And as an example, they recently presented their work on automating adjustments to the mitral valve behavior within the living heart, a recording which you can find on the SIMULIA learning community very soon. So to advance on what we talked about a couple weeks ago and follow on what Steve just introduced, there's a lot that can be done with the SIMULIA tools for life science applications, but often the question is how this can be done in an efficient manner and how can you scale your usage. So as you consider adopting or expanding your usage of SIMULIA software for life science applications, the partnership that we have with Thornton Tomasetti can help you and show you how this can be done with customized training for specific life science applications, on and off-site mentoring, research, and a variety of other tasks that will make it all easier for you to leverage the power of SIMULIA software for life science applications. This covers medical devices, pharmaceutical applications such as tablet manufacture or drug delivery mechanisms, planning treatments, and predicting outcomes by simulations of the human body, and also covering consumer products that require better modeling of human-device interactions. So again, this partnership between Hawk Ridge and Thornton Tomasetti will allow you to advance your usage of SIMULIA products for life science applications in a confident and productive manner. In particular, for cardiac applications, Thornton Tomasetti has developed significant expertise with the living heart and can help you get started or go to proceed down the path of more advanced usage of the living heart in combination with various other SIMULIA products. Here's a sample of the examples that they've worked on, including developing an automated method to match targeted mitral valve shapes, which opens the door to match imaging data sets, simulating ventricular dilation that then allows the testing various devices to address the resulting problems with mitral regurgitation stents, and covering virtual bench test. Simulations within vascular or within coronary vessels in the living heart model, and optimization of various kinds of devices. All of this is done with the full SIMULIA suite, including Abaqus, iSight, Tosca, FE-Safe, and soon the 3D Experience solutions. So thanks again for joining us today. If you are involved in life sciences but also have an interest in high tech, we welcome you to come back next Friday morning, and where we're going to have a SIMULIA Abaqus webinar on the multiphysics analysis with to improve reliability with high tech devices. It does look like we have a question. Roland was asking what the URL was that was just posted. So that was 3ds.com. Are there any other questions that we might be able to answer at this time real quick? I know that there was a question earlier about hardware, and I imagine that that is something that's going to have to be researched to give you an accurate answer. Okay. Well, with that said, I want to thank you again for joining us today. There will be a recording of this that will be sent to you by link so that you can watch it again or share it with your friends. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact Hawkridge Systems directly, and we can get you in touch with SIMULIA or another expert, perhaps at Thornton Tomasetti, to help you with this understanding of the software. Good morning and good day. Bye.